how we selected a new president of the UNC system, and a Russian jet crashes in the Sinai. Next on the Academics. Hello, I'm Leigh Dunston of App State's Walker College of Business, and welcome to the Academics. Please meet our panel. On my right and on your left, Nancy Love of Government and Justice Studies, Michael Wade of App State's History Department, and Paul Gates of the Department of Communication. Well, panel, let's get going today. We've got several things we want to talk about. This Russian Metrojet, which crashed in the Sinai. I know that there is an investigation going on, but yesterday the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Cameron, said that it was more probable than not that this was a terrorist act. What do you think, Nancy?
I think we can't rush to judgment until we have all of the evidence that will confirm whether or not there was, now seems reports are suggesting, a bomb in the cargo hold. But more important, I think, if that does prove to be true, it suggests that ISIS is expanding to civil aviation and beyond the region, and that is going to bring the battle to the US, to Russia, to England, to our coalition partners, and that is going to destabilize further Middle East policy.
It's kind of interesting that you would suggest that it might very well be ISIS, and it might, but if we engage in the assumption that it is a terrorist attack, it is also possible that it's al-Nusra. It is also possible that it is Hezbollah. It is also possible that it is, and that suggests to me that the whole question of what in the world is going on in Syria and in the Middle East in general is impossible to figure out.
Well, but, geographically, this is close to Yemen, and Yemen seemed to be the specialists in attempts to bring down aircraft with hidden bombs, the underwear bomber and the toner cartridge attempts and things like that. So this kind of looks like that to me, that this might be another version of their attempts that was successful this time.
Just for the record, a splinter group of ISIS that is organized in the Sinai has claimed responsibility. Now,
yes,
they may want credit,
and
without actually having engaged in terrorism.
It's interesting, isn't it, that they all want credit, and they all seem to want to engage the United States as quickly as they can, and anybody else in the Western world as quickly as they can, on the ground, with boots on the ground, so that they can become martyrs. Mike?
Question. Who has Putin? Who have Putin's forces been attacking? Not ISIL, right?
No.
So what about them? If this is a bomb.
So help me out here.
Well, I don't know the organizations beyond ISIL, but I'm suggesting that if this should be a bomb, and I think it's way too early to tell, I think David Cameron runs the risk of being a talking head rather than a prime minister.
When has that ever stopped a politician?
One can hope.
Okay.
What about those people? It would seem that the people he's been attacking would be the most logical people if it's to go that way. The other thought I had is this. If this is indeed the fruit of Putin's intervention in Syria, then this tragedy's on his head. The other thought is this: President Obama's been criticized for not being more aggressive about Putin's intervention. I'm reminded of something from The Art of War, Sun Tzu. When your enemy's in the process of destroying himself, stay out of the way.
And who are you suggesting is our enemy?
I'm saying that in this case it's probably Putin. Well, there are plenty of enemies over there.
There are plenty of it.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Mike, that you would say that, because that's exactly, almost word for word, what Donald Trump has said. Calm yourself. Calm yourself. He said early on, right after Putin made his move into Syria and started with his flights and his bombing, that, well, great, let Putin do our dirty work for us.
Well, this is what I get for switching to NCIS reruns when Trump comes on.
Yeah.
You would have gotten a tip.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can't entirely discount some sort of internal catastrophic failure. I think the Russians are, shall we say, somewhat casual about aircraft maintenance. And there's a history of Russian aircraft going down for various mechanical and reasons of pilot error. So we don't know, and I'm holding out for that, perhaps.
Nancy?
I agree that we don't know. The situation, though, is going to have an effect on Egyptian tourism, which will matter for the region. It will also, I think, affect decisions of the U.S. and coalition partners to arm Syrian rebels, and it makes our diplomatic initiatives to try to avoid the creation of a vacuum, when Assad falls, even more important. So in the absence of definite knowledge, there are still some issues that need to be addressed.
Yeah. Let's move on to this University of North Carolina university system president. Just within the last 10 days, a lady who was the former Secretary of Education under George W. Bush was named by the Board of Governors of the UNC system to be the new president of the UNC system. Her name is Margaret Spellings. Mike, can you give us some quick background on why we're even talking about this and what makes this potentially quite controversial for everybody in North Carolina, and for that matter, maybe throughout the country?
Let me begin like this. The national search for Margaret Spellings has produced Margaret Spellings. Why not Tori Spelling? Here's the thing. The trouble with treating this topic intelligently is that serious public business has been turned into a farce. The top secret Board of Governors search for the presidency of the UNC system, closely managed by its now departed chair, has produced Margaret Spellings, a career holder of appointed political positions without any academic credentials, say for a BA in political science from the University of Houston. Secretary of Education. On her watch, the disastrous No Child Left Behind program flourished, as did abuses of the federal student loan program by for-profit colleges like Corinthian University and the University of Phoenix. She thinks that being gay is a lifestyle choice, supports the inclusion of creationism in the academic curriculum, and I think it's the latest step in the cheapening of higher education in North Carolina, while making it much more expensive at the same time.
How is it making it more expensive?
Tuition has gone up.
I know, but does Margaret Spellings have anything to do with that?
No, I said it's the latest step.
I see.
She has been brought in, I'm pretty sure, to provide links to conservative funding sources for the universities as the legislature continues to withdraw tax support.
Well, would it be fair to say, though, Mike, that if you have the experience of being the Secretary of Education in whoever's administration, the Secretary of Education of the United States, that you're going to pick up some pretty interesting and pretty important experience that may help you understand how a university system works?
It's possible. I don't know that I don't know that the understandings that she has appears to have picked up based on the Spellings Commission are the ones that are going to help universities in the 21st century.
No, I don't think anything that she's picked up has not been the product of a weighing of different points of view and things like that. She has towed the party line all the way through. I mean, that's how she got the Secretary of Education position, because she was going to follow the Bush thinking, and that's what Mike's talking about, is importing it to North Carolina.
Well, I need to hold people back here just a second. I've heard, and I must admit, I don't pretend even to be I'm only a nodding acquaintance with No Child Left Behind. But I remember vividly that Ted Kennedy, the liberal lion in the United States Senate, helped George Bush pass No Child Left Behind. And then I guess Margaret Spellings helped implement it across the country as the Secretary of Education under George W. Bush. So I'm not sure I understand why everybody is so jammed up about her credentials if she has been the Secretary of Education.
Well, now your original question was what she knows about universities, and I would go back to that and say what you learn about the way to really learn about universities is from within, not from without. No Child Left Behind is largely a public schools phenomenon.
Yeah, it's a K through 12 kind of thing. That's the way it was designed. And the fear is now that that's going to be pasted onto the university experience, which is completely different.
The fear is that Margaret Spellings is going to try and do a No Child Left Behind program inside the North Carolina university system?
Well, something along those lines. I don't think.
How would what would that look like?
I think it's going to be a great emphasis on Common Core, perhaps. They've talked about that even before Margaret Spellings arrived.
And what's so wrong with that?
Well, it doesn't take into account the different missions of the different universities. I mean, we've got 17 universities
a Common
here.
Core across the entire university
Yes.
system.
Right.
I see.
Right.
Well, let me stop you on that right there. I have never understood, since I've been an adult, why universities don't require young people to have a course in Western civilization. It's beyond me. Absolutely beyond me. How can anybody consider themselves reasonably well educated if they don't have a course in Western civilization, much less another course in Eastern civilization, and African civilization, and South American civilization? I mean, what are we talking about here? How can anybody be educated?
Well, you will really be disturbed by this administration.
So I'm going to be spinning in my hopefully not great.
They represent, and the Spellings Commission, the Commission on the Future of Higher Education, represented an instrumentalist sort of information as knowledge approach to education, focused on what they think will be dominant vocations in the 21st century, and the assumption is those will largely be related to a global marketplace.
And then to achieve that, then what they're going to look at very closely is what business calls return on investment. I mean, and the investment is going to be made by the students, not by the state, which refuses now, I think, to view public education as a public good. Which it of course is, especially at the university level when you get that close to adulthood and so forth. But regarding it as a private good, I mean, of course, the person that gets an education gets a good job.
I wish you'd explain that a little bit more, Paul, because I think that's a very important distinction.
Well, it's looking at education as a public good. You have to see that it benefits everybody. And conversely, it requires the support.
Including the ditch digger and the ditch digger's children.
Exactly.
How?
Because they live in the society that has been created by graduates and so forth, and they benefit from that. And conversely, it requires the support of the ditch digger, whose kids may not go to college, requires the support of people who don't have kids to go to college, and it requires the support even of people who send their children to private school, because this is the educational process that is going to run society. And to ignore that is, I think, is catastrophic. This is not the way to.
Nancy?
Yeah, if I could jump in there. I think in terms of the credentials that Margaret Spellings brings, it's her public policy and political expertise rather than her understanding from within of the university system. And in an era when state governments are divesting from their public universities, it may, speculating here, have been the thinking of the board that she would be able to forge a relationship with the state legislature, with the government, that would benefit the university. The problem that I have is that if that relationship is premised on the purpose of university education being a private good, then we're still leaving out of the picture the ways that public education can create informed citizens who will lead rich, full lives, which is the purpose of the liberal arts, also the purpose of non-commercial research. So if her political mission is the university as an engine of economic development, that's probably too narrow to encompass what a university
Sure.
purpose can and should be.
Absolutely.
Two things. It is all that you said and should be, continue to be that. That's not the vision.
Right.
And the other thing is this, what the education, type of education you're talking about and Paul is talking about as a public good involves students knowing what the 21st century is actually going to look like, as opposed to the assumption that it will be an 8-decade, extension forward of the status quo. That's not going to happen. They're presuming that it is. What they're also presuming is that a larger role for corporations. You withdraw public support, the money's got to come from somewhere, and that then becomes grants and other forms of support tied to corporations, which gives them greater control over the educational mission. And at the very time that we face some of the greatest crises in human history, we're going to be narrowing our focus down to white-collar vocationalism.
Well, Mike, you're making,
a recipe for disaster.
You're making a not-so-veiled indictment of where you think the thinking is in Raleigh. And my question is...
Oh, I think we've heard it repeatedly.
And so help me, or help our audience, understand what are some of the things you've heard from some of the people in positions of political power that cause you to conclude that there is going to be a narrowing of the educational mission and a focus more on what corporations want rather than what the people need.
Three things. The governor saying that the purpose of the university should be to put butts in jobs. The statements basically justifying the appointment of Margaret Spellings, that she will bring political expertise, connections to the corporate world, and what we see right here at our university, as well as in others, the much ramped up emphasis on faculty finding grant money.
If I could just jump in there, in the Spellings report, if we can take that as a guide to what she might see as her vision for the universities.
Report was when?
The Spellings report was under the Bush administration when she was Secretary of Education. And citizens are defined as people who are able to lead and compete in the 21st century global marketplace. I think citizens have something to do with democracy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's right.
So Paul, can you help us understand some of the machinations that went on as it related to just simply how did this person become the president of the UNC system, and what actually happened that is potentially troubling?
Well, I think what we've got to do is go back to actually before the search process, such as it is, actually started. I mean, this all started with the dismissal of Tom Ross, which immediately...
And who's Tom Ross?
Tom Ross is the current president of the UNC system. He was dismissed in January with no explanation. That was the first clue that this was going to turn out badly. And certainly that happened. Then the search committee was formed, an 11-member search committee, headed by one of the Board of Governors members. And they went through a search, or so they claimed. No one ever knew anything about it. They knew where they were meeting to vote. They didn't know anything about the search, how the search was being conducted. That was kept completely in the dark, so much so that the other members of the Board of Governors, there were 11 members of the search committee, 21 other members of the Board of Governors, they didn't even know what was going on, and they complained about it. And a couple of the governors on the outside wrote letters complaining about the management of the whole process, not just by the search committee, but by the chair of the Board of Governors. A couple of letters were written by boards of governor members who called for the chair's resignation, John Fennebresque, which he did resign shortly after the Monday after Spellings was announced. He did step down. But there has been great suspicion, and there's no reason to think otherwise because the Board of Governors has not provided any explanation. There's no reason to think that there really was a search. I think the General Assembly got wind of this, and about a couple of weeks before Margaret Spellings was...
Is it required under the law that there be a search?
No. No, it's not.
So we're talking about a long-held tradition as it relates to a position of this importance and this amount of power inside the University of North Carolina, that there would be a careful, thoughtful search that would be vetted every which way.
That's right.
And we think that may not have happened.
Right, yes. Yeah, we would have expected a search to include input from other constituents, certainly the faculty and administrators and up and down the system, but that was dismissed. That was not received.
And I think I remember reading that the legislature actually got involved and said that it wanted to make sure that this was a more thoughtful process.
Right. Well, that was because of the suspicion that there was no process. And the Board of Governors received a mandate, and which eventually turned into a General Assembly bill that 3 names be put forward because this was a response to their being left in the dark. And
that is the legislature being left in the dark.
After the Board of Governors had also been left in the dark. That bill languished under state law.
Did that bill pass through the legislature?
It passed the legislature, but then it sat on McCrory's desk. And
so I want to make sure we got this so our audience knows. So the legislature of the state of North Carolina, dominated by Republicans, passes a bill that says we need to have a more open procedure so that we know what's going on in this selection process. That bill goes to Governor McCrory's desk, and it sits on his desk to either be signed, to be vetoed, or to simply, what?
Become law automatically at the end of October. And what happened is McCrory just let it sit, and the governors then hurried up the announcement, put it up ahead a week so that they would be completed, the process before the bill took effect. And that's exactly what happened.
And now we have that law in effect, but it was only in effect after Margaret Spellings had been picked as the new UNC president.
A week later, yes.
You know, it hardly seems...
Mike, something told me you were going to get in here.
Well, it hardly seems coincidental that the Board of Governors followed this supposedly open search with hefty raises for 12 of the UNC system's chancellors. One has to wonder, was it to further encourage their support? for downsizing traditional faculties at these institutions in favor of part-timers and impersonal distance learning, and crowding out traditional higher learning in favor of more white-collar vocational training. That seems to be the selection, if that's what it was, of Mrs. Spelling.
That's a pretty serious suggestion.
It's a
you're making.
question.
I'm not.
It's a question.
It's not a charge, so we need to be clear. You haven't made a charge, but it's a suggestion that we ought to maybe connect the dots, suggesting that these raises are to keep you all quiet while we
And
jam
I'm
through
not
some stuff.
I'm not suggesting, as was suggested in the 1824 election that we were talking about before the program, that this is some sort of a corrupt bargain. I'm simply saying that the immediacy of these two events raises some questions. And there were what, 5 people who did not get 5 chancellors who did not get raises.
Something like.
You know, what was their position on this search? You know, one wonders. What's not left to wonder is that the entire business of this was kept secret from the taxpayers of North Carolina from beginning to end. And secrecy and refusal to discuss the public's business is the hallmark of undemocratic oligarchies.
I hear you, Mike. And ladies and gentlemen, I think you can tell that generally speaking, our panel this week is not completely pleased with the way the selection of the University of North Carolina president went down. It is up to you to decide what you think based upon what you have heard, and do your own research to form your own opinion as well. That's our program for this week. You can reach us with your questions and comments at watchapptv.com. Please join us next time. Thanks, I'm Leigh Dunston.